He found a small, injured alien girl hidden in his barn. His act of kindness changed everything. Thomas Grayson wiped sweat from his brow as the alien sun began its descent behind the distant purple mountains. His muscles ached pleasantly from a hard day's work, tending to his crops on this remote frontier world. 6 years since he'd left Earth's overcrowded cities and suffocating regulations, trading it all for 40 acres of fertile soil on Proxima 9, a planet most humans considered too isolated to bother with. Another day done, he muttered to himself, surveying his handiwork. Rows of Earth vegetables adapted to alien soil through years of trial and error. The farmhouse ahead was simple but sturdy, built with his own hands from local timber and stone. A far cry from the sleek, prefabricated units most off-world settlers used. Thomas preferred things with character, with history. Even his barn was a testament to that philosophy. A weathered structure of reclaimed metal and wood that looked like it belonged on an ancient Earth farm, rather than an alien world 27 light-years from humanity's birthplace. As darkness fell, Thomas showered away the day's grime, the water recycler humming softly. He prepared a simple dinner of lab-grown protein and vegetables from his garden, eating alone at his kitchen table while scrolling through messages on his datapad. The usual updates from the settlement 30 miles away, commodity prices, weather forecasts predicting the seasonal rains would arrive in 3 days. He was about to turn in when he heard it. A faint clattering from the barn, followed by what sounded like a whimper. "Damn varmints again," he grumbled, reaching for the flashlight he kept by the door. The last thing he needed was some native creature getting into his seed stores. The night air carried a chill as Thomas crossed the yard, his boots crunching on the gravel path. The twin moons of Proxima 9 cast everything in an eerie, blue-silver glow. He pushed open the barn door, wincing at the creak of hinges he'd been meaning to oil for months. "Hello?" he called out, sweeping his flashlight across the interior. Farm equipment cast long shadows against the walls. "Whatever you are, you'd better not be eating my seeds." Another sound, something metallic falling over behind the stack of storage barrels in the back corner. Thomas approached cautiously, wishing he'd brought something more substantial than a flashlight. The settlement authorities warned about predatory creatures that sometimes wandered in from the wilderness beyond the farmlands. He rounded the barrels, flashlight beam cutting through darkness, and froze. Huddled against the wall was a small figure, definitely not an animal. A child, no, not human, an alien child. Her skin was a vivid blue that seemed to shimmer slightly in the flashlight beam. Large turquoise eyes filled with unmistakable terror stared up at him. Her white hair was matted with dirt and what looked disturbingly like dried blood. One of her thin arms was clutched protectively against her chest, and her pointed ears trembled visibly. "Holy shit," Thomas whispered, immediately lowering his flashlight to avoid blinding the terrified creature. He recognized her species, Cerulean, a humanoid race from a system about 10 light-years from Proxima. They rarely ventured this far from their homeworld. The child flinched when he took a step forward, pressing herself harder against the wall. She wore what had once been a pink shirt, now torn and filthy. Her thin legs were covered in scratches and bruises. Thomas crouched down, making himself smaller. "Hey there," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. Are you okay?" No response, just those huge eyes watching his every move. "My name's Thomas," he continued, keeping his voice gentle. "This is my farm. Are you hungry? Thirsty?" At the mention of water, the child's eyes widened slightly. Thomas nodded, understanding. "Water. You want water. Okay, I'm going to get you some, all right? I'll be right back." He backed away slowly, not wanting to frighten her further. His mind raced as he hurried back to the house. What was a Cerulean child doing here, alone and injured? The nearest settlement with non-human residents was over 100 miles away. When he returned with a canteen of water and some soft bread, he half expected the child to be gone. But she remained in the same spot, watching him warily as he approached. "Here," he said, setting the items down and sliding them toward her. "It's safe." After a moment's hesitation, the child lunged forward, grabbing the canteen with her good hand. She drank desperately, water spilling down her chin. When she finished, she snatched the bread, devouring it in quick, furtive bites. Thomas sat cross-legged on the dirt floor, giving her space. "What's your name?" he asked, though he didn't expect an answer. The child finished the bread, then looked at him with those enormous eyes. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely audible. "Elena." Thomas smiled, careful not to show his teeth. He remembered reading somewhere that some species considered that aggressive. "Nice to meet you, Elena. Can you tell me how you got here?" Her face crumpled and tears welled in her eyes. "Bad men," she whispered. "They took everyone. I ran away." A cold feeling settled in Thomas's gut. He'd heard rumors of trafficking rings operating in the outer systems, targeting non-human species. Ceruleans were particularly valued for their empathic abilities. "You're safe now," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "Let me help you with that arm." Elena hesitated, then extended her injured arm slightly. Thomas could see it was swollen but probably not broken. "I have medicine at the house," he said. "Will you come with me? It's warmer there." After a long moment, Elena nodded, rising shakily to her feet. She couldn't have been more than 6 by human standards, though he wasn't sure how cerulean aging compared. As Thomas led her toward the farmhouse, he glanced up at the stars scattered across the alien sky. His quiet, solitary life had just become infinitely more complicated. And somehow, he knew it was only the beginning. Thomas gently wrapped the bandage around Elena's slender blue arm, careful not to apply too much pressure. The antiseptic he'd applied had made her wince, but she hadn't cried out. Tough little thing. "There we go," he said, securing the bandage with a small clip. "How's that feel?" Elena flexed her fingers experimentally. "Better," she whispered, her voice like wind through leaves. "Thank you." They sat at Thomas's kitchen table, the warm light casting a homey glow that seemed at odds with the situation. He'd given her one of his shirts to replace her tattered clothing. It hung on her like a tent, but at least it was clean. The dirt and blood he'd washed from her white hair revealed it had an almost pearlescent quality, shimmering with subtle blues and purples when she moved. "Are you still hungry?" Thomas asked, already knowing the answer. He could see the way her eyes followed his movements when he'd prepared a simple meal earlier. Elena nodded shyly. Thomas smiled and stood, moving to the cooling unit. "I've got some fruit that might be to your liking. Not sure what ceruleans prefer, but—" "How do you know what I am?" Elena interrupted, her large eyes suddenly wary. Thomas paused. "I've traveled a bit before settling here. Met some of your people on Arcturus Station." He placed a bowl of mixed fruits on the table. "They were merchants, I think. Very skilled at reading emotions." Elena selected a piece of purple fruit, sniffing it cautiously before taking a small bite. "My mother was a merchant," she said quietly. "Before the bad men came." Thomas sat down across from her, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Can you tell me what happened, Elena? Who are these bad men?" Her small fingers tightened around the fruit. "Collectors," she said, the word filled with fear. "They hunt us, put us in cages, sell us to rich people who want—" She struggled with the concept. "Want to feel what we feel, use our gifts." Thomas felt a surge of anger. He'd heard rumors about black market trafficking in empathic species. Ceruleans were particularly valued for their natural ability to sense and influence emotions, abilities that unscrupulous individuals would exploit for everything from business negotiations to twisted entertainment. "They came to our settlement 3 days ago," Elena continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Mother hid me in a secret place under the floor. Said not to come out no matter what I heard." Her eyes filled with tears. "I heard terrible things." Thomas reached across the table, hesitating before gently placing his hand over her tiny blue one. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." She looked up at him, tears spilling down her cheeks. "They took everyone. My mother, my father, my sister Lorena. When it was quiet, I ran. I ran for so long." She sniffled. "Your farm was the first place I found." "You're safe here," Thomas assured her, though a part of him wondered if that was true. His farm was isolated, both a blessing and a curse in this situation. The nearest settlement was too far to reach quickly if trouble came, but perhaps too far for these collectors to search easily. "How did you get away from them?" he asked. "Did they see you escape?" Elena shook her head. "I don't think so. But—" Her sentence cut off abruptly as her head snapped toward the window, ears twitching. Thomas followed her gaze but saw only darkness beyond the glass. "What is it?" "Lights," she whispered, fear returning to her voice. "In the sky." Thomas moved to the window, dimming the kitchen lights with a gesture to the house's simple AI. At first, he saw nothing but the familiar twin moons and stars. Then he caught it, a faint shimmer against the night sky, moving in a deliberate pattern. Not the random twinkling of stars or the steady trajectory of a commercial transport. "Shit," he muttered, forgetting to moderate his language. "Someone's scanning the area." Elena was beside him now, her small body trembling. "It's them! The collectors. They have machines that can find cerulean blood." Her voice cracked. "They'll take me away." Thomas's mind raced. His farm had no defenses beyond basic perimeter alerts. He'd never needed them. The nearest authorities were hours away, and even if he could reach them, who knew if they'd help? Frontier law was notoriously lax when it came to non-human matters. "We need to hide you," he said, decision made. "Somewhere they won't think to look." He led Elena quickly through the house to the cellar door, hidden beneath an old rug in the pantry. The space below was cool and dark, used for storing his harvest and homemade wine. "There's a false wall behind those shelves," he explained, pointing. "I use it to age the good liquor. It's shielded to maintain temperature. Might block their scanners." Elena looked at the dark space dubiously. Thomas crouched to her level. "I know it's scary, especially after what you've been through. But I promise I won't let them take you. I'll be right upstairs." She studied his face with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. "You're afraid," she said simply, "but not for yourself." Thomas blinked, surprised by her insight. "I'm concerned for both of us. But I've got a plan." That wasn't entirely true, but he needed to project confidence. The scanning ship would either move on or land. If they landed, he'd deal with it, one way or another. Elena reached out suddenly, placing her small blue hand against his cheek. A strange warmth spread from the contact, a feeling of trust. "You are kind," she said, "not like the others." Before Thomas could respond, the proximity alert on his wrist device chimed softly. Someone had crossed the outer boundary of his property. "Time to go," he said, helping Elena into the hidden compartment. "Stay quiet, no matter what you hear. I'll come get you when it's safe." As he closed the hidden panel and reset the shelving, Thomas's hand drifted to the drawer where he kept his old service pistol. He'd left Earth and its conflicts behind, sworn never to fight again. Some promises, it seemed, were made to be broken. Thomas gripped his service pistol, the weight familiar yet unwelcome in his hand. 6 years since he had held it last, the day he'd packed his belongings and left Earth's military behind. He checked the charge indicator, full. At least he'd maintained it properly before storing it away. The proximity alert chimed again, more insistently. Multiple signatures now, moving toward the farmhouse from different directions. Professional approach, military or mercenary tactics. A new alert flashed on his wrist device. Another ship, smaller than the first, had entered atmosphere directly above his property. It was descending rapidly, too rapidly for a controlled landing. "What the hell?" Thomas muttered, moving to the window. The second craft streaked across the night sky, trailing fire. A ship in distress. It disappeared behind the tree line at the far edge of his property, followed by the dull thud of impact. No explosion, thankfully, but whoever was piloting that vessel was either desperate or incompetent. His tactical assessment was interrupted by a harsh pounding on his front door. "Planetary Authority. Open up!" The voice was gravelly, with the distinct clicking undertone of a Vexarian, a reptilian species known for their mercenary work throughout the sector. Thomas tucked the pistol into the back of his waistband, covering it with his shirt. No point starting with hostilities if they could be avoided. He opened the door to find 3 figures silhouetted against the night. The leader was unmistakably Vexarian, tall and broad-shouldered with scaled skin and vertical pupils that gleamed in the porch light. He wore what appeared to be official enforcement armor, but Thomas noted the insignia was outdated and the equipment mismatched. The 2 flanking him were Drazak enforcers, their bulky exoskeletons making them appear even more menacing. "Can I help you?" Thomas asked, feigning confusion while blocking the doorway with his frame. The Vexarian's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile. "Captain Nex, Proxima Sector Enforcement." He flashed a badge too quickly for Thomas to verify. "We're tracking a fugitive believed to be in this area. Blue-skinned cerulean child. Dangerous." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous? A child?" "Ceruleans are deceptive," Nex replied smoothly. This one killed her handlers and escaped custody. We need to search your property." "I haven't seen any blue children," Thomas said truthfully, "and I don't recall Proxima Enforcement having authority to enter private residences without a warrant." Nex's eyes narrowed. "On frontier worlds, security protocols supersede privacy rights when public safety is at risk." "Is that so?" Thomas leaned against the doorframe, projecting casual confidence. "Funny, I just spoke with enforcement last week about upgrading my perimeter sensors. They didn't mention any Vexarians on the payroll." The captain's scaled hand drifted toward his holstered weapon. "You're interfering with an official investigation, Farmer." Before the tension could escalate further, a new sound cut through the night, someone crashing through the underbrush at the edge of the cleared yard. All heads turned toward the commotion. A figure emerged from the darkness, stumbling slightly. Even in the dim light, Thomas could see she was cerulean, the same vivid blue skin as Elena. But this was no child. She was tall and lithe, with flowing white hair that seemed to capture and reflect the moonlight. Her clothing was torn and dirty, and a dark stain that looked suspiciously like blood spread across her side. "Help!" she gasped, her voice melodic even in distress. "Please!" The Vexarian captain hissed in surprise. "Restrain her!" he ordered his companions. Thomas made a split-second decision. He drew his pistol and leveled it at the captain's head. "Nobody moves," he commanded, his voice dropping into the authoritative tone he hadn't used since his military days. The Drazak enforcers froze, their insectoid eyes shifting between their captain and Thomas's weapon. "This woman needs medical attention," Thomas continued, "and you three need to explain why official enforcement is so eager to apprehend injured civilians." The blue woman's eyes widened, fixing on Thomas with startling intensity. "They're not enforcement," she said, her voice stronger now. "They're collectors. Slavers. They attacked our settlement. Took everyone." Her gaze hardened as she looked at the Vexarian. "I recognize him. He led the raid." Captain Nex's facade dropped, his reptilian features contorting with rage. "The merchandise is talking too much," he snarled, reaching for his weapon. Thomas fired a warning shot that scorched the deck planking beside the Vexarian's foot. "Next one goes through your knee," he warned. "All of you, weapons on the ground, now." For a tense moment, Thomas thought the captain might risk it, but the Vexarian slowly placed his blaster on the porch, his companions following suit. "You have no idea what you're involving yourself in, human," Nex said, his voice cold. "That blue bitch is worth more than this entire worthless farm. The child even more. Hand them over and perhaps we can negotiate a finder's fee." "Not interested in your blood money," Thomas replied. "Now back away, nice and slow." As the three retreated, Thomas gestured for the cerulean woman to approach. She moved with surprising grace despite her injury, climbing the porch steps to stand beside him. "Thank you," she whispered, close enough now that he could smell a faint floral scent beneath the dirt and blood. "I'm Lyrina." Thomas felt a jolt of recognition. Elena's sister, the one she thought had been captured. "Inside," he murmured, quickly. Once they were safely inside with the door locked, Thomas kept his weapon trained on the window while Lyrina collapsed into a kitchen chair, her hand pressed against her wounded side. "They'll be back," she said, her voice strained, "with more. We need to leave." "My sister," Thomas said. "Is she here?" "Please, a small child. Our parents." "She's safe," Thomas assured her, moving to the medical kit he'd left on the table. "Hidden downstairs. Let me tend to that wound first." Lyrina's eyes, the same striking turquoise as Elena's, filled with tears of relief. "She escaped." "I didn't know if." Her voice trailed off as Thomas gently moved her hand to examine the injury. The wound wasn't as bad as it appeared, a deep graze rather than a penetrating injury. As Thomas cleaned and dressed it, he couldn't help noticing the strange warmth that seemed to emanate from her skin, similar to what he'd felt when Elena touched his face, but somehow more intense. Lyrina watched him work, her gaze appraising. "You have military training," she observed. "Not just a farmer." Thomas nodded. "Former Earth Defense Force. Decided I preferred growing things to destroying them." "And yet you still fight when necessary," she said softly. Her hand covered his, sending an unexpected current of sensation up his arm. "My people have a saying, the truest nature of a being reveals itself in moments of crisis." Their eyes met, and Thomas felt a peculiar tightening in his chest. There was something in her gaze. Gratitude, yes, but something else. Something that made the room suddenly seem warmer. The moment was broken by a small voice from the pantry doorway. "Lyrena! Lyrena!" Elena cried, launching herself across the room into her sister's arms. The older cerulean winced at the impact, but held the child tightly, murmuring soothing words in their native language, melodic sounds that reminded Thomas of flowing water. "I thought they took you," Elena sobbed, her small blue fingers clutching at Lyrena's torn clothing. "They tried," Lyrena said, stroking her sister's pearlescent hair. "But I'm not so easy to cage." She looked up at Thomas with those mesmerizing turquoise eyes. "Thank you for protecting her." The moment was interrupted by the harsh whine of engines outside. Thomas moved to the window, staying to the side to avoid being silhouetted. "They're back," he said grimly, "and they brought friends." Through the darkness, he could make out the collector's ship hovering above his fields, its searchlights sweeping methodically across his property. On the ground, at least 6 figures were advancing toward the house, using his own crops for cover. "We need to leave," Lyrena said, rising from her chair with Elena still clinging to her. "Is there a vehicle we can use?" Thomas nodded. "All-terrain transport in the equipment shed, but we'd have to cross 50 meters of open ground to reach it." He checked his pistol's charge again. Not enough firepower to clear a path. "I can help," Lyrena said, her voice taking on a determined edge. She gently set Elena down. "My empathic abilities. I can project emotions, fear, confusion. It won't stop them, but it might disorient them long enough for us to reach your vehicle." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You can do that?" "All ceruleans can influence emotions to some degree," she explained. "I'm particularly gifted, but it takes a toll." Her hand went to her wounded side. "And I'm not at my strongest right now." A blast hit the side of the house, shaking the structure and showering them with dust from the ceiling. "Doesn't seem like we have much choice," Thomas said, moving quickly to a storage cabinet. He pulled out a compact energy rifle, another relic from his military days. "I've got a few surprises they won't be expecting." Lyrena's eyes widened at the weapon. "You're full of secrets, farmer." "Let's just say I plan for contingencies." He handed her a small backpack. "Emergency supplies. Food, water, medical kit. Grab anything else you think we'll need. 2 minutes." As Lyrena quickly gathered a few items, Thomas knelt before Elena. "We're going to play a game," he told her, keeping his voice steady despite the sounds of the collectors taking positions around the house. "When we run for the shed, you stay between me and your sister. Like a sandwich. Can you do that?" The child nodded solemnly. "I'm fast," she assured him. "I bet you are." Thomas smiled, then turned to Lyrena. "Ready?" She nodded, her white hair gleaming in the dim light. "The back door?" "They'll be expecting that." Thomas moved to the kitchen and pulled up a section of flooring, revealing a narrow tunnel. "Maintenance access for the irrigation system. Comes out behind the equipment shed." Lyrena looked impressed. "Definitely not just a farmer." "In the EDF, we called it tactical foresight." He gestured for them to enter the passage. "I'll cover our retreat." The tunnel was cramped but navigable, leading them beneath the yard to emerge behind the large metal shed that housed Thomas's farm equipment. From their position, they could see the collectors focusing their attention on the farmhouse, unaware of their quarry's escape. "The transport's inside," Thomas whispered. "Once we're in, I'll open the main doors. That's when they'll spot us. Lyrena, that's when we'll need your abilities." She nodded, her face tense with concentration. "I'm ready." They slipped inside the shed where Thomas's transport waited, a rugged military-grade vehicle with reinforced plating and oversized tires. He helped Elena into the back seat while Lyrena took the passenger side. "Hold on," he warned, starting the engine. The vehicle hummed to life, its electric motor nearly silent. He pressed a button on the control panel, and the shed doors began to slide open. Immediately, shouts erupted from the collectors. Searchlights swung toward them. "Now, Lyrena!" The cerulean woman closed her eyes, her face contorting with effort. Thomas felt a strange pressure in his mind, then a wave of something intangible swept past him. Outside, the advancing collectors stumbled, some dropping to their knees, others firing wildly in random directions. Thomas floored the accelerator. The transport burst from the shed, bouncing over the uneven ground as he steered toward the tree line. Blaster fire sizzled past them, most shots going wide thanks to Larina's empathic interference. A bolt struck the rear armor, rocking the vehicle. In the back seat, Elena whimpered. "Almost clear," Thomas assured her, swerving to avoid another volley. Beside him, Larina gasped, her concentration breaking. Blood trickled from her nose and she slumped in her seat. "Lyrina," Elena cried from the back. "I'm all right," the older cerulean managed, though her voice was weak. "Just drained." They reached the trees, the dense foliage providing cover from both the ground forces and the ship's searchlights. Thomas navigated by memory, following a maintenance trail that led deeper into the forest. "Where are we going?" Larina asked, wiping blood from her face. "There's an old mining outpost about 40 kilometers north," Thomas explained, checking the rear sensors for pursuit. "Abandoned years ago. We can regroup there, figure out our next move." He glanced over at Larina, concern evident in his expression. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, her blue skin had taken on an ashen quality. That was impressive back there. Never seen anything like it. She managed a weak smile. "Cerulean empathic projection. It's why they hunt us." Her hand reached out, resting lightly on his arm. "Your mind is unusually resilient. Most non-ceruleans would have been affected too." Thomas felt that same strange warmth where her fingers touched his skin. Military training included CSI resistance. "It's more than that," she said softly. "There's something about humans, about you specifically, a strength I've rarely encountered." Their eyes met briefly, and Thomas felt an unexpected surge of attraction that had nothing to do with empathic abilities. Despite the danger, despite the circumstances, he couldn't deny the connection forming between them. The moment was broken when the transport sensors blared a warning. The collector's ship had changed course, moving to intercept them. "They've locked onto our engine signature," Thomas said, returning his attention to driving. "And this transport isn't exactly built for stealth." "The mining outpost," Larina said. "Will it have communications equipment?" "We need to contact the Resistance." "Resistance?" "A network fighting against the syndicate that controls the collectors," she explained. "They've been working to disrupt trafficking operations across the sector." Thomas nodded. "The outpost should have a long-range comm array if it hasn't been stripped for parts." He glanced in the rear view at Elena, who had fallen asleep despite the bouncing ride. "Your sister's been through a lot." "We both have," Larina said quietly. "Our parents—" Her voice trailed off. Thomas reached over, taking her hand in his. "We'll find them," he promised. "I'm not letting those bastards take anyone else." Larina's fingers intertwined with his, that strange, pleasant warmth intensifying. "Why are you helping us? You could have turned us away, saved yourself all this trouble?" Thomas considered the question as he navigated around a fallen tree. "Where I come from, we have a saying. The measure of humanity isn't found in how we treat those who can help us, but in how we treat those who can't." "Your people have wisdom," Larina murmured, her thumb tracing small circles on the back of his hand. As they drove deeper into the forest, leaving behind the farm that had been Thomas's sanctuary for 6 years, he realized that his life had irrevocably changed the moment he found a small, injured alien girl in his barn. And somehow, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The mining outpost emerged from the forest like a ghost from another era, a collection of prefabricated structures half reclaimed by native vegetation. Thomas killed the transport's lights as they approached, relying on the moon's glow to navigate the overgrown access road. "Doesn't look abandoned," Larina observed, pointing to the main building. "Look at the entrance." Thomas narrowed his eyes. The heavy metal door hung askew, blast marks scarring its surface. "Forced entry. Recent too. Those scorch patterns would have weathered if they'd been exposed to the elements for long." He parked the transport behind a storage shed, concealing it from aerial surveillance. In the back seat, Elena still slept, exhausted from their ordeal. "I'll carry her," Thomas said, lifting the child gently. She stirred but didn't wake, instinctively curling against his chest. Larina retrieved the energy rifle and led the way, moving with a silent grace that impressed Thomas. For someone injured and drained from using her abilities, she maintained remarkable awareness of their surroundings. The interior of the main facility told a grim story. Overturned furniture, scattered equipment, and dark stains on the floor that Thomas recognized all too well from his military days. This wasn't abandoned, he murmured, setting Elena down on a relatively clean couch in what appeared to have been an administrative office. It was attacked. Lorena knelt beside a console, brushing away dust. Recently, too. Maybe a month ago. Her fingers danced over the controls, and to Thomas's surprise, the system hummed to life. Emergency lighting, casting the room in a soft blue glow. "You know your way around human tech," he observed. She offered a small smile. "My father was a merchant. I grew up helping him negotiate with various species, learning their systems." Her smile faded. That's why the collectors took him first. His knowledge of trade routes, contacts. Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling that now familiar warmth pulse between them. "We'll find him." "Your mother, too." Lorena covered his hand with hers, the gesture intimate despite its simplicity. "The communications array should be on the upper level. If it's intact, we might reach the resistance." While Elena slept, they made their way to the facility's second floor. The damage was less extensive here, though signs of struggle remained. The communications room had been locked down during the attack, its reinforced door still secure. "Military-grade encryption," Thomas noted, examining the access panel. "Interesting security for a mining operation. Can you bypass it?" Thomas grinned. EDF Special Operations has its perks. He pulled a multi-tool from his pocket and set to work on the panel. Minutes later, the door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Inside, the communications array stood intact, a sophisticated setup that seemed excessive for a remote mining outpost. Thomas activated the system while Lorena searched through data files on a nearby terminal. "Thomas," she called, her voice tight, "you need to see this." He joined her at the screen, where she'd pulled up internal security logs. The footage showed the attack, a coordinated strike by collectors led by the same Vexarian captain who'd come to his farm. But it wasn't the violence that made Thomas's blood run cold. It was what came after. The footage showed Cerulean prisoners being fitted with neural inhibitors, cruel-looking devices attached to the base of their skulls. In the final clip, a Cerulean man was brought before a holographic projection of a shadowy figure. "Demonstrate," the figure commanded. The Cerulean, his eyes vacant, raised his hands. The collectors around him suddenly dropped to their knees, faces contorted in what appeared to be ecstasy. "Excellent," the shadowy figure purred. "The empathic network proceeds as planned. Soon we will have enough nodes to influence every major political and financial center in the galaxy." Lorena turned away, her face ashen. "They're not just trafficking us. They're turning us into weapons, empathic slaves to manipulate emotions on a massive scale." Thomas felt sick. "The Syndicate, who are they?" "A conglomerate of the worst criminals in the sector," Lorena explained, her voice hollow, "led by someone known only as the Director. They control everything from spice running to weapons trafficking. But this," she gestured to the screen, "this is beyond anything we suspected." Thomas continued searching through the system, finding a hidden partition in the database. This outpost wasn't just a mining operation. It was a syndicate front, disguised to look legitimate. He pulled up a star chart with dozens of marked locations. These must be other facilities, collection points, processing centers. "And this," Lorena said, pointing to a blinking icon near the galactic core, "is their headquarters, where they'd take the processed Ceruleans." Thomas downloaded the data to a portable drive. "This is what the Resistance needs. Proof of what's happening, locations to target." He established a secure channel on the communications array, transmitting a coded message on frequencies he remembered from his military days. "Now we wait. If anyone's listening, they'll respond within 12 hours. They returned to the lower level, where Elena still slept peacefully. Thomas secured the perimeter as best he could, setting up makeshift alarms using equipment salvaged from around the outpost. When he returned, he found Lorena staring out a window at the twin moons, her white hair shimmering in their light. She'd found clean clothes in the facility's storage, a simple jumpsuit that hugged her slender form. "You should rest," he said softly, coming to stand beside her. "I keep seeing their faces," she whispered. "My parents. The others from our settlement, knowing what's being done to them." She turned to him, her turquoise eyes glistening with unshed tears. "How do humans bear it? Such pain?" Thomas reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We endure. We fight. We hold on to hope." "Is that what you did?" after whatever made you leave the military? He nodded slowly. I saw too much darkness. Came here to find light again, to grow things instead of destroying them. And instead, destruction found you anyway, she said, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, directly over his heart. I'm sorry for bringing this to your door. Don't be, Thomas said, covering her hand with his. Some things are worth fighting for. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something beyond physical attraction. Larina's empathic nature meant she could surely sense his desire, but there was more than that passing between them. A recognition, a connection that transcended species. My people have a belief, Larina murmured, stepping closer until barely a breath separated them, that souls sometimes recognize each other, even when meeting for the first time. Thomas felt that strange warmth spreading from her touch, intensifying as her free hand came up to trace the line of his jaw. And what does your soul tell you about me? That you are rare, she whispered, strong yet gentle, fierce yet kind. Her eyes searched his. That perhaps the universe brought Elena to your barn for more reasons than one. When their lips met, Thomas felt a surge of sensation unlike anything he'd experienced before, a connection that seemed to resonate on multiple levels. Physical desire, yes, but also a sharing of emotion, of understanding that went deeper than words could express. Later, as moonlight spilled across the simple bed they'd found in one of the outpost quarters, Thomas traced the patterns that seemed to shimmer just beneath Larina's blue skin, subtle markings that became more visible in the dim light. Beautiful, he murmured. Larina smiled, her fingers exploring the contours of his chest with fascinated curiosity. Your kind has a strength we lack, she said softly. Not just physical, something in your spirits. You face the darkness without empathic gifts to guide you, yet you don't surrender to it. Not all of us, Thomas admitted. Humans can be cruel too. But you choose not to be, she said, her palm coming to rest over his heart again. That's what makes your species remarkable. The choice. As they found comfort in each other's arms, the dangers outside temporarily held at bay, Thomas realized how profoundly his life had changed in just 24 hours. From solitary farmer to protector, fighter, and now something he hadn't expected to find again after leaving Earth behind. A man capable of connection, of caring deeply for others. All because he'd found a small, injured alien girl hidden in his barn. Thomas jolted awake to the shrill beeping of the outpost perimeter alarm. Beside him, Larina was already sitting up, her turquoise eyes alert despite the early hour. The soft blue of her skin seemed to glow in the dim light filtering through the blinds. Proximity alert, he said, reaching for his clothes. Multiple signatures. The communications console chimed simultaneously, indicating an incoming transmission on the secure channel Thomas had established the night before. He exchanged a glance with Larina before activating the receiver. A gruff, female voice emerged from the speaker. Outpost Delta, this is Valkyrie. Authentication code Sierra 9 Echo. Respond if you're receiving. Thomas recognized the military protocol, EDF Special Operations. Valkyrie, this is Thomas Grayson, former EDF captain. Authentication Tango 4 Delta. We have a situation here. No kidding, Grayson, the voice replied with dry humor. Our scans show at least 3 collector vessels converging on your position. ETA 12 minutes. We're inbound, but we're 20 minutes out at best. Thomas checked the outpost's rudimentary sensor display. Confirmed. 3 ships approaching from different vectors. Tactical formation. They're boxing us in, Larina observed, now fully dressed and checking the energy rifle's charge. Valkyrie, we have critical intelligence on syndicate operations and 2 Cerulean refugees, including a child, Thomas reported. Who exactly am I speaking with? Commander Susan Banks, Earth Resistance Network. We've been tracking syndicate activities in this sector for months. The woman's voice hardened. The data you transmitted confirms our worst fears about their empathic network project. We need that information and your Cerulean friends alive. Thomas's mind raced through options. The outpost has a stockpile of mining explosives in the East Storage Bay. We could create a diversion, buy some time. Negative, Commander Banks responded. Our intel suggests the syndicate's regional director is personally leading this hunt. Guy named Drax, Vexarian, nasty piece of work. Captain Nex, Lyrina said, her voice tight. He led the raid on our settlement. Not Captain, Banks corrected. That's his cover. He's the regional director of the entire syndicate operation in this sector, and he's not taking chances this time. Those ships are carrying enough firepower to level that outpost. Thomas moved to the window, assessing the terrain. We need an extraction point they won't expect. There's an old maintenance tunnel, Commander Banks suggested. Runs from the outpost's lower level to an emergency bunker about 1 kilometer east. Our scans show it's still intact. We can land there, stay under their sensors. Copy that. We'll head there now. And Grayson, Banks added, good to have you back in the fight. Thomas ended the transmission and turned to find Lyrina already waking Elena, explaining the situation in gentle terms that wouldn't frighten the child. We're going on another adventure, Lyrina was saying, helping her sister into her shoes. Some friends of Thomas are coming to help us. Elena looked at Thomas, her large eyes solemn. Are the bad men coming back? He knelt beside her. They are, but they won't catch us this time. I promise. The child nodded, her trust in him absolute. It was a responsibility Thomas felt in his bones, one he wouldn't fail. They gathered essential supplies quickly. Thomas found the entrance to the maintenance tunnel behind a storage cabinet in the facility's basement level. The passage was narrow but navigable, designed for emergency evacuations. I'll take point, Thomas said, activating the light on his energy rifle. Lyrina, you bring up the rear. Elena stays between us. The tunnel stretched ahead, reinforced with metal supports at regular intervals. They moved as quickly as possible, aware of the collectors closing in above them. Thomas estimated they were halfway to the extraction point when the first explosions rocked the tunnel, sending dust and small debris raining down on them. They're bombing the outpost, he called back. Keep moving. Another explosion, closer this time. The tunnel supports groaned ominously. Thomas! Lyrina's voice was urgent. The tunnel's collapsing behind us. He turned to see a section of ceiling giving way about 20 meters back. Lyrina scooped Elena into her arms and sprinted forward as the collapse continued, gaining momentum. Run! Thomas shouted, grabbing Lyrina's free hand and pulling them forward. They raced through the tunnel as the chain reaction of failing supports pursued them like a predator. They burst through the exit into the emergency bunker just as the final section of tunnel collapsed. Dust billowed out after them, coating them in a fine gray powder. Cutting it close, remarked a tall, dark-skinned woman in tactical gear, her hair pulled back in tight braids. She held an advanced assault rifle with practiced ease. Commander Banks, welcome to the Resistance, folks. Behind her, a sleek transport vessel waited, its ramp extended. Half a dozen armed humans in similar gear secured the perimeter. The collectors? Thomas asked, catching his breath. Still searching the outpost ruins? Our stealth systems should keep us hidden, but not for long. Banks gestured toward the transport. Let's move. As they boarded, Thomas felt Lyrina's hand slip into his. Her touch carried that now familiar warmth, along with something new, a sense of hope. The transport lifted off smoothly, its engines nearly silent. Through the viewport, Thomas watched the smoking remains of the mining outpost recede into the distance. Another chapter of his life closed. Where are we headed? He asked Banks, who was studying a tactical display. Earth Alliance outpost in the Arcturus system, she replied. It's technically neutral territory, but we have strong support there. Your data on the syndicate operation is going to help us coordinate a major strike against their facilities. Lyrina stepped forward. What about our parents? The other Ceruleans who were taken? Banks's expression softened slightly. We've identified 3 processing centers from your data. Rescue operations are being planned as we speak. She glanced at Thomas. We could use someone with your experience, Grayson, if you're willing. Thomas looked at Lyrina and Elena, 2 people who had entered his life by chance and changed it completely. The quiet farmer's existence he'd built seemed a lifetime away now. I'm in, he said simply. Later, as the transport entered hyperspace, Thomas found a moment alone with Lyrina in the small crew quarters they'd been assigned. Elena had finally relaxed enough to sleep, curled up in a bunk with a blanket pulled tight around her. What happens after? Lyrina asked softly, standing close enough that Thomas could feel the gentle heat radiating from her blue skin. After we find my parents, stop the syndicate. Thomas reached up to brush a strand of white hair from her face. I was thinking about that. My farm's probably a smoking crater by now. I'm sorry, she said, genuine regret in her eyes. Don't be. It was just a place. His hand lingered against her cheek. Home isn't always about where you are. Sometimes it's about who you're with. Lorena's eyes shimmered with emotion. My people have a tradition, she said, taking his hands in hers. When we find our life bond, we share a connection that transcends physical space, a joining of minds and hearts. Her fingers intertwined with his. I've never felt such a connection with anyone before you. Even though I'm human? Thomas asked, half joking. Perhaps because you're human, she replied seriously. Your kind has a passion, a determination that my people sometimes lack. You fight against impossible odds. You never surrender. She smiled. As my father would say, humans are gloriously stubborn. Thomas laughed softly. I've been called worse. Their lips met in a kiss that carried the promise of a future neither had imagined possible days ago. When they parted, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. Whatever comes next, he promised, we face it together. 3 months later, Thomas stood on the observation deck of the Arcturus station, watching ships come and go against the backdrop of swirling nebula gases. The Earth Alliance flag flew prominently beside the cerulean emblem, a new partnership forged in the aftermath of the Syndicate revelations. The coordinated strikes against Syndicate facilities had been successful beyond expectations. Hundreds of captive ceruleans had been freed, including Lorena and Elena's parents. The empathic network plot had been exposed, leading to sweeping reforms in interspecies relations and security protocols. And Regional Director Drax, the Vexarian, who had called himself Captain Nex, was now in Alliance custody, awaiting trial for crimes against sentient beings. Admiring the view? Lorena's voice came from behind him. She approached with Elena skipping alongside her, both dressed in new clothing that complemented their blue skin. Behind them walked an older cerulean couple, their parents, still recovering from their ordeal but healing a little more each day. Just thinking about how much has changed, Thomas replied, drawing Lorena to his side. The Alliance is actually taking empathic rights seriously now. Your father's trade proposals are being implemented. All because a human farmer decided to investigate a noise in his barn, Lorena's father said with a warm smile. Our people will not forget what humanity has done for us. Elena tugged at Thomas's hand. Are we still going to have a farm? She asked, her once fearful eyes now bright with childish enthusiasm. Thomas knelt to her level. A better one. The Alliance has offered us land on New Terra. Plenty of space to grow things. He glanced up at Lorena. And build a home. Lorena's smile held all the warmth of the future they would share. A home for all of us. As Thomas stood surrounded by his new family, a family born from one simple act of kindness, he reflected on how finding a small, injured alien girl hidden in his barn had indeed changed everything, and he wouldn't have it any other way.